I'm Jen Spurko. I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel. I'm thrilled to not be a panelist because I think you guys are going to find that our two panelists have a lot of great thoughts and ideas, far more than I would. I'm firmly, when it comes to the gaming world, firmly in the fan camp. So mostly a writer and podcaster, and I guess player of games, located in East Tennessee. And my name is Jen. I'm she, her. And I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. You can say hi to Gabby. Gabby Hall, as we were just saying, is coming to us from Boston. And I'm just going to give the one line intro that you gave me because I think it's great. Uh, a science nerd who writes horror and makes podcasts at night.
Quick and
In a
simple.
nutshell. Yeah, that's Gabby in a nutshell. I will, if you, with your permission, I will say just a little bit more. They also do, voice acting and art and sound design and lots of cool things. I think you may, hopefully, will mention some of your, titles and things that you've
Twist
worked
my
on.
arm.
Yeah, but I'm going to go back to your official bio because I also love the last line of that, which is they love overanalyzing horror video games, writing horror stories, identifying mushrooms, brewing tea, making visual art, and petting cats. I definitely like some of those things as well.
Amazing. We'll gladly talk about all of the above, focusing on video games in this panel specifically.
Yeah, and it's important to note that we do have a Discord over. I think the channel that we're in is the Keep.
Yes.
So there is, if past panels are any guide, we will have more to say. Y'all will have more questions. We'll have more things to talk about. So feel
Yeah.
free to continue the conversation there. But I also want to introduce Arturo Serrano. I had the pleasure of serving on Arturo's panel earlier. Arturo is a reviewer for a Hugo winning blog called Nerds of a Feather, which a lot of you probably have heard of. He has written science fiction reviews for Hypable, and we've seen he's had his short fiction out in a couple of anthologies published in Columbia. And he's also the author of the alternative history novel To Climates Unknown, and tying it a little more closely to our topic today, of a Pathfinder second edition conversion of the Shifter class, and was longlisted last year for the Best Fan Writer Hugo Award. So delighted that you're here with us, and coming to us from Bogota. Um, so I thought at first I would just say, open it to you, and before we get into my actual questions, are there things that you would like to say about yourself or about your work that would be relevant to this panel that I didn't know to say, Arturo? Anything we need to add to your intro?
Well, my the specific circumstances in which I became involved in the RPG design community have to do with my interest in non-violent gaming,
Mm,
which is my main focus.
hmm. Interesting. I hope we have a lot of chance to talk about that. Gabby, anything we need to add? Anything you want to bring up?
I think you covered it. Things that I forgot.
Well, you covered it. You wrote the thing. And thank you for giving us your pronunciation guide, T. Glad you're here. I think Bo is also here, so welcome to the panel. Well, let's start off. We're talking about upcoming trends in gaming, and so I thought we might start with we want to be sure to give y'all plenty of time for questions. And as every panel is, these could all be 3-hour conversations for sure. But I wonder if we could start things off maybe with just each of you giving maybe the top 3 trends that you think are going to be the most interesting or most important. And I'll flip it and go the other way this time. So Gabby, would you care to start? What are the top 3? 3 is an arbitrary number. You can be flexible with that.
Ooh, so much power.
I know.
Um, well, okay. One of the things that I'm very excited for is storytelling in video games, which I know has been done, but I feel like is becoming more and more of a thing where when someone talks about a video game, it's about like, I can't believe this character did XYZ, or oh, I relate to this, or ooh, that decision, was so hard with this and that. Um, and like very people human-centric games. And I know that's especially relevant with like people getting into like people who haven't even played video games watching like The Last of Us on HBO, crying our eyes out because it's a people, human-centric uh, game, and so that's one thing that like I'm hoping for more and more of, especially as indie creators also start getting into the space more and more, which they have. I mean, we've seen that for the past few years, or maybe even more. I'm getting old, where there's these beautifully intricate stories that people are making in their bedrooms and sharing, for the world. And I want more of that. Also, soundscaping and environmental storytelling is something that I am such a sucker for. And there was like one video that I saw recently of someone playing a game where, you know, the world around you is pitch black and the only thing you have is like a lidar sensor, and there's like creatures around that, you'll see hints of them and then it'll vanish as they disappear, or you'll see them move but you can hear everything. And it just kind of, it was a new mechanic that was really good environmental storytelling, and I just love finding new mechanics and new like uh ways of soundscaping and really immersing you into the environment. And I am ranting. Who knows if that had any kind of like coherent message, but I'm looking forward to more stuff. And Arturo, your turn.
Well, trends that I am noticing that are that I anticipate will become more and more important in upcoming years is, first of all, a moving away from the first influences that created role-playing games in the first place. Role-playing games, in their first form, are descendants, on one side, from the heritage of military wargaming. There was something called Kriegspiel, which was a tool by the Prussian army to simulate battles in real life. They use it as a training tool, as a strategic planning tool, and the same mechanisms of the Kriegspiel evolved over time to become the battle grid of Dungeons and Dragons. That is a huge oversimplification, but that element of simulating combat is being de-emphasized now. We are seeing a moving away from the legacy of Tolkien, a moving away of the legacy from the legacy of the sword and sorcery aesthetic, like Conan the Barbarian. All of that constituted the core of what the first versions of Dungeons and Dragons and related games used to be, and that foundational influence is exactly what is being abandoned right now. We are seeing games that discard the bioessentialist assumptions of Tolkien in terms of character ancestries. We are seeing a de-emphasizing of the aesthetic that the world is a violent place, a brutal place, uh, a move away from rewarding violence as part of the gaming experience. And the prime example that I would like to quote is the Cipher system by Montecook. It is an explicit rule of the Cipher system that you do not get experience points for killing, which I think is fantastic. And also a move toward decolonization of the settings, uh, not only in terms of what world the players are going to meet, what ancestries they can play, what are the assumptions about what ancestries are and their moral values and traditions, but also decolonization of the gaming activities. Because the stories that we are seeing now in role-playing games are no longer about going to someone else's homeland and taking their stuff. That's that's not really cool anymore. Not that it ever was, but that's not the focus of what the campaign writing is aiming for now. So I would call this a shift from the mathematical codification of violence in the form of combat simulation toward the mathematical codification of storytelling itself. RPGs are no longer, at least the ones that I find interesting these days, are no longer focusing so much on the simulation of the combat, on the codification of violence, but on giving players the tool for storytelling and even reducing the adversarial relationship that used to exist between the dungeon master and the players. Now it is collaborative. The players themselves have a bigger input in creating the world that they are playing in.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, and I just, I always shock because I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since the early '80s, gasp, and a lot of my younger friends, who play are always shocked when I tell them there were two ways to get experience points in the old days, in the early days: gold, like treasure, and killing.
Mm.
And now, at least it's just killing, but I'm seeing a move. I'm thinking about a lot of the big actual plays that people watch are using like milestone experience points. So it's still that point level system, but it's not tied to violence, which I think is great. What are some examples of, you've mentioned the cipher system, which is wonderful, and I hope that maybe we can all, maybe in the Discord or in the chat, we can put in some of these titles. Are there a couple of other, maybe a few other games, and I'll throw this to you in a second too, Gabby. Are there a couple of specific games that you see maybe that are fairly new or are coming out soon that exemplify some of those trends you were talking about, Arturo?
Well, I have been following in particular the trend of nonviolent gaming, and in that specific genre, which exemplify what I would call gentle fantasy. Recent games that we can name would include Tea Time Adventures, Wander Home, Golden Sky Stories, and one that I helped design, The Caravan Endures. In the interest of full transparency, I designed the PDF for that game. But even if I hadn't been involved in the game, I would still recommend it. The Caravan Endures is a very sweet, gentle game about collaboration and teamwork that doesn't necessarily have to include combat ever. But when it happens, the focus is not so much how hard you punch, but how your friends help you.
I love that. Now, Gabby, it sounds like your interest is more in video games. Is that fair to say?
It's spread across both. I also
Okay. Yeah.
uh
So are there some
love
examples of the trends that you
yeah,
noticed that you would like to share?
totally. So like I listen to D&D podcasts, I play
Hmm.
D&D, and uh in the actual like in the podcasts, I've noticed that I mean also to make it a podcast, you have to make it entertaining, which
Right.
oftentimes is either comedy or storytelling. And the ones that I tend to listen to happen to do both, where by the end of the show, I'm sobbing like oh my god, this character finally got the payoff for XYZ, and
Yeah.
it's more about their interactions with each other. Uh, and regarding experience points, like there's there's one that I've been listening to that I'm sure y'all have got Dungeons and Daddies. It's like a so good,
Love
but
it.
it's in the title. It's like not a BDSM podcast. It's just they
That's
happen
so
to be
good.
dads and they're playing Dungeons and Dragons. So it's Dungeons and whatever.
It's
Um,
wonderful.
they joke that they don't actually play D&D because a lot of it is more about the story
Mhm.
and comedy, and the way that they get experience in the current campaign is by like destroying certain uh like objects as opposed to people. um and so like when I listen, it's for the story, but then when I play, there's one uh like outside of Dungeons and Dragons. There's one that my roommates and I are putting together by the book is Thirsty Sword Lesbians. Yes. It is so good. The artwork, the character descriptions, like It's absolutely amazing. And it's not combat, it's like gay flirting. um, and I've also noticed that like more and more people are making TTRPGs. It's like just like, video games, it's becoming a lot more indie. And as a result, I agree with you, Arturo, that we're moving away from, the things that helped make, TTRPGs and help make video games, where the only thing you could do is click a button and shoot something and like destroy something or attack someone and get points. Like it was simple and it worked, so I change it. But now there's so many tools, there's so many people with different experiences who aren't a certain demographic who tend to dominate everything. um, then that's when we get those storytelling and nonviolent uh, like gameplay. And outside of TTRPGs, Arturo, there's one that I think you would especially like that I was playing called Seasons. It's this video game where you're an archivist, and it's kind of this beautiful, like Breath of the Wild looking open world, and you have a bike and a gay little outfit and a book. And your job is to finally leave your village and explore all these different cultures and people and take pictures and record sounds
Is
and put them in your journal.
is that set like in the desert?
Um, oh, I think you're thinking of Journey. You might be thinking of that, where you're kind of like this amorphous character that doesn't have arms and kind of bounces through the desert, maybe, maybe not.
No, because a friend gave
Mhm.
me as a gift a video game that was made, must be like last year. That sounds
Mhm.
a lot like what you're describing.
Could be.
Uh,
It came out, I think it was this year.
let,
Um,
let me double check real quick
yeah,
in my
yeah,
Steam
absolutely.
library. Sable.
Cybo. Okay, I'll have to look into that. It seems to be different, but I wrote Cybo
It's
down.
like what you described. The game is
Yeah.
about leading your community and exploring, and you
Mhm.
have your bike.
Yes,
Uh,
amazing. Yeah.
I I love hearing about this because when I play Skyrim, I spend 80% of my time picking flowers. Like
Yes.
like it's just like, it's very therapeutic.
Mhm.
And I've heard people say that about Red Dead Redemption. I mean, these are violent games. These are fighting and killing games. And and I hear people talk about, how much they love hanging out at the campfire, riding their horse or whatever. And so I think it's interesting, like we've been kind of remaking games
Mhm.
into this, what you guys are describing or trying to for a while. And I like that now, creators, I mean, I'm sure creators have always been doing it, but now they are getting some, some platform and some
Yeah.
attention for sure.
It's
I
Yeah.
remember being upset during the time when I was playing Age of Empires 2.
Oh my gosh. What a
I
throwback.
was upset that I couldn't just build a civilization of monks who grow their food.
Mhm.
Why should I go somewhere else and kill their king?
Mhm. Yeah.
And more recently, when I got Civilization 6, I made it a point to try to get the diplomatic victory and the cultural victory and the tourism victory and the space travel victory. And I got this close to getting all of them in the same session. And after that, what do you do? I don't like to I don't like to role play the act of killing. It doesn't do it anymore for me.
Mhm. Yeah. And I have a whole list of like games that like the ones that I was excited about happen to
Mhm.
all be non-violent, except for Silent Hill.
I
Um,
mean, every now and then maybe in a valve, right?
yeah, just throw it in. But like Outer Wilds is one that just changed like my brain chemistry. And like I, bond with other people over it where you're just this little dude alien who goes around space and dies and then revives and dies and revives and has to figure out what's going on. And it's just this beautiful exploration game that makes you think internally. Um, and Disco Elysium, I haven't gotten to play that yet, but so many people love it. And it's, investigation, like it's character and story. And then the other thing is like music and like Grease, for example, music and art can make a game. And that's a beautiful example of it, where it's this game about the stages of grief demonstrated in like a moving art piece with music that I still listen to this day. It's just like there's so many new ways that people are using video games to share experiences and stories rather than give experience points for killing things. Yeah, I'm gonna.
No, that's great. And maybe you can put that list, some of your ideas in the chat or the Discord or both.
Oh yes.
I didn't warn you guys that I might ask you this, but I'm curious as we're talking, if you have any thoughts about why now, what's happening in the world or in the world of in the industry that is permitting this growth, this evolution, if you will, into these some of these newer modes of gaming. And if that seems like too much to throw at you the last minute, that's fine. You can just pass. But I'm really curious as you're talking. There's so many great games coming, that are kind of changing and redefining what gaming is. Any thoughts about why now? What's going on that is encouraging that sort of growth right now? Uh, I don't remember who went first last time. Gabby, I think Arturo went first. Do you have any thoughts?
Um. Yeah. 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 I I feel like it coincides with the rise in like changes in podcasts, for example, because that's just the community I happen to work in, where it's like POC, neurodivergent, like people who initially didn't have access to uh, the positions where you can make those decisions, or at least openly make those like big video game decisions, are now being able to. And as technology becomes more and more accessible and the internet much more easier to use, and uh, resources like RPG Maker and Unity become more well understood. It and the community also that comes up uh, naturally from these things. Like the fact that we're here talking about video games, I think, is a result and also contributes to that, where people can collaborate and then make their own games and meet. And, uh, that's kind of what I am thinking. Arturo, thoughts?
Well, on one side there's the growth of the self-publishing movement, the tools for editorial services, editorial correction, proofreading. Now almost anyone can go on social media and say, I need a beta reader for this. Who knows where I can have eyeballs look at this. Uh, and it has been also happening in the wider speculative fiction community.
Mhm.
Uh, Independent publishers have become more and more prominent. Self-publishers have gained more and more respect. Uh, and this happens in the context of what has been called the rainbow age of speculative fiction. You may remember science fiction used to have this thing called the golden age and the silver age. Now we live in the rainbow age, where um, it is more common to see writers from all sorts of diverse backgrounds writing all sorts of innovative, diverse stories, even stories that don't follow the traditional Aristotelian structure of Western storytelling. This explosion in diversity is what's fueling, both in fiction and in game writing, this this new diversity that we are seeing, which is goes in parallel with the with the move toward decolonizing the game. If you allow me, I can name some additional games that are focused specifically on decolonial stories. The first that one absolutely has to mention is Coyote and Crow, which not only created its own setting but its own game system to play stories where in a world where North America was never colonized. That has been uh, that has been even noticed by the bigger companies. Paizo did recently a book setting the Mwangi Expanse for their Pathfinder Second Edition game, which is an African-inspired playable setting. And more recently, there was the book Impossible Lands, which is inspired by the cultures of South Asia. But also, independent publishers have been uh, dipping their toe in decolonial storytelling. There is Boricubos, I will write it on the chat. Boricubos is a game setting inspired by the mythologies of Puerto Rican indigenous peoples, the Taino, playable for D&D 5e. There is Cuautla, that is a playable game setting for D&D 5e, and I think also for Pathfinder, inspired by Mexican mythology. And there is Coboa, which the same playable world for D&D and Pathfinder, inspired by the mythologies of South America. So diverse creators are noticing that they can get to do this. They can use their own traditions and their own heritage to share the stories and their fun with the world, and that does a lot to compensate for the mistakes made 80s, 90s, 2000s, where the big companies try to create diverse game settings that were not really all that diverse and all that respectful, and were written from the Western perspective and have a lot of Orientalist cliches. Now the people who used to be written about are writing their own settings and their own stories.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a phrase I'm familiar from disability studies, but it might be used in other fields too, called if it's about us, it's not without us. In other words, the people who are part of that group need to be collaborators at minimum. It's interesting, I think, and I think maybe this helps with the growth of all the indie creators, both in podcasting and in video making and in game design and all this sort of stuff, thanks to the internet. Because I think sometimes when the big companies, maybe with good intentions, maybe just to make money, everybody knows about the rainbow capitalism or whatever, will try to incorporate people of color or, people, whether it's set in the past or the future or a distant land, or I'm thinking of the BioWare game that had very badly handled having a transgender character who introduced themselves. I'm so and so, but my other name used to be such and such. And I'm like, yeah, 100% how transgender people introduce themselves to a stranger. What? Did you even get a beta reader? So when indie folks are doing it, when indigenous people are writing their own stories, or Black creators and writers and people are creating their own stories, and they're not making those kinds of mistakes. And I think that's really important. Wonderful. So I want to ask the panelists, we have a question in the chat. Do you want to, can we throw to that question, or did you want to continue on this train a little bit further? Okay, to go to the question?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you, Marie. You're modeling good question etiquette. If other folks have questions, I love that there's a lot of comment and vibrancy in the chat. But if you have a question, it makes it a lot easier for me to spot it if you can actually write the word question at the beginning of it. If you would prefer to speak, if it's more accessible for you to speak your question, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen that you can put your hand up. And then and then we can actually hear your question. You can unmute and hear the question. But Marie's question, going back to something we were talking about a little earlier, what advice would you give? And I'll I'll throw this to both of you. What advice would you give an indie game developer about incorporating environmental storytelling? So last time we started with Gabby, Arturo, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Well, I suppose environmental storytelling is more a term related to video games,
Mm-hmm.
but when you are designing an RPG, everything carries meaning. Every element that you add to a fictional setting can be loaded with meaning and with uh, possible connections to other symbolic elements in the
Mm-hmm.
story. So, one design principle that I remember seeing when I began getting involved in the community was that a game is about what the mechanics reward, and
Right.
that not only has to do with which actions are rewarded, which actions get experience points, but also which actions get more detailed attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that brings me back to when I was talking about the cipher system. There's the cipher system, but there's also the fate system, and there's the power by the apocalypse system,
Mm-hmm.
in which character creation does not focus so much on how hard you can punch and how many arrows you can carry, but rather what do you care about? What are your values? What are your connections? What are your relationships? Uh, and that can be expressed in the world of the game. Uh, I remember one of the things that I strongly dislike about the setting of D&D 4e is the assumption that the world at large is a dark, dangerous place with only points of light in the inhabited settlements. That structure choice for the playable world immediately tells the players what the game is about. How you structure the world, how you tell the players where you can find danger and when you can find refuge, and who you can trust and you cannot trust. That structuring of the world sets a tone, it sets an aesthetic, and it reflects a worldview. I'm not interested in playing in a world that was built from the assumption that the world is by default dangerous and threatening, and that civilized settlements are the only hope against the darkness. Uh, there are there 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 are possible ways to express the author's values in the setting, and you can borrow lots of the tools from science fiction and fantasy, how they express their values and their worldviews and their themes in how they design the world where the story happens, and how they design the interactions between the civilizations that exist in that world.
Mm. Thank you for that. It
Yeah.
sounds like maybe the first step of that advice is to do some like thinking.
Mhm.
Like I would do some thinking, and that might look like, journaling or just, different forms about what I value. What kind of a world do I want? And that before even you know, the game design begins, you're starting there, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you
Um,
have anything to add? And I know you have more of a perspective on maybe on video games that you want to include, or I mean, it's okay if they're not, if it's also tabletop, but
yeah, it's more Arturo's definitely the TTRPG person between the two of us, absolutely. But the so I kind of have two uh points that I want to touch on. One, I have to touch on horror because I have to, and then the other one is an example that I think worked really well and can share some insight. Um, for horror, the I don't know if you're specifically thinking of it, but just an example of like setting tone is like taking away senses can and information is something that I find really valuable. Where, for example, like the first Silent Hill game, which um, starts with you just being in a fog covered town where you can't see past like 5 feet in front of you. And because it's on an old station, they had to do that for like loading reasons, but it also worked really well because you can't see in front of you and you know you bought a horror game. So there's that expectation that something can happen. Like you're alone in a house and the lights are off and you're playing a scary game. Like there's that when you take things away and then give that expectation, um, is what I, find really valuable in environmental storytelling for horror, specifically. But then, um, just an example of environmental storytelling that I found, again, Outer Wilds. it, the storytelling in it is so good. I am going to avoid giving spoilers as much as possible because it's definitely one of those that you just have to go in without knowing anything. Um, and then you're just, uh, but when you start the game, your eyes open, you see and kind of like an explosion, and then you just wake up by a campfire and you hear the crackling of the wood. There's calm music playing. You get up and there's someone next to you who you can talk with, and they're just like, "Oh, are you excited to go on your fun little trip?" Like it's just so calm. And as you explore the planet, there's just these people on rocking chairs. There's these kids you can play hide and seek with. There's water flowing. It starts turning into night. And then the fireplaces start, glowing and giving that really homey feel. And even though the game gives such like existential, not dread, but it touches on existentialism, and there's death and explosions and like things that are violent to the human body and mind. The entire tone, the entire time you play this game is waking up by that campfire and just talking with people and hearing music and searching for music, and thinking internally and reflecting. Um, and I think that intro to the game also really helped set that tone where the first thing that you do is just wake up by a campfire, and listen to nice, calming music. And that feeling never leaves you, even as you're navigating through like scary situations. Um, so that was one form of storytelling that I absolutely loved and I think can
That
inform.
that's a really interesting example, that the importance of that tone setting, and especially if you contrast it with Silent Hill, where what you have is not a crackling fire, and it's like the absence of those things.
Yep.
It's really powerful. So I mean, maybe where a creator starts, you know, start with your principles, what do you value, and then another step is just like really like pay attention, right? I think we, let me speak for myself. I shouldn't generalize. I tend to sort of bustle through. I talk to my other panel, I have ADHD. I'm sort of got media coming at me a lot of the time. Um, so it takes a real effort from me, but I can't, and it's really important and valuable when I do, to just like listen. Like, what am I hearing right now? What am I smelling? What am I seeing? What does that make me feel like? Now, no, you can't smell in a video game. I'm aware, but you can describe a smell, I guess. But it's just all part of that sensory, like what is
Mhm.
the information that I'm getting, but also what is the tone? And maybe that's a great step for a would-be creator to think about those things. Again, totally aside from the narrative. I mean, yeah, you've got to have a setting and a narrative and the game components, but I think these kinds of background things are really important.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. We've got some comment in the chat, but I don't think we have any additional questions yet. So one question I wanted to ask, and again, I apologize because this conversation has brought this question to my mind. So I guess I could pretend I'm typing it in the chat like an attendee. Um, I'm curious where folks can find out about new games? Like, what's your source of information? And I'll start with you, Gabby. Again, we're reversing the order. How do you hear about the new games that are coming out, and the new trends in the gaming world? What's your source or sources?
That's such a good question.
That's why I couldn't resist throwing it at you, even though it's new. If you need a minute to think, you can pass, or
I
we can
think
come back.
Arturo save me. I'll
Hey,
give
what if Arturo wants to pass as well? Come on, we can all pass around.
okay. I can.
No, I'm not. Arturo, please let her off the hook if you can. Please let them off the hook if you can. They've reached out a hand.
I have an entire section of my Feedly profile for websites that I already know have this kind of news. If I can quickly enumerate them,
Now
there
that's a
is
good answer.
uh, you
I think
get
we would all love for you to enumerate them. Yes.
you get a lot of grapevine news from Bleeding Cool, Den of Geek Tyrant, Heroic Hollywood, Inverse, IO9, Nerdist, Popverse, Starburst Magazine, Blaster News, spelled without an E, and sometimes even Tor and Wired. Those are like the big places. But you can even go directly to the each website and see what people are publishing, and you can go to the drive-through website and see what people are publishing. And if you select strategically whom you follow on social media, you get a lot of gossip because people find things they like and they repost them, and I've made several contacts by totally by chance, simply for from looking at whom the people I respect are reposting and boosting. Mm,
I think I would if I could just jump in. You can also follow creators. I follow Monty Cook and Kobold Press, for example. I follow both of them on Instagram, and they're always posting about stuff they've got coming up and things. So there's a good chance that the either the publisher or the creator you're interested in, might might have social media channels.
And I might talk about other games that are coming up too.
Right. Or in the comments, people might talk about those other games in the conversation. I think Arturo's idea of these accidental connections honestly is incredibly valuable. That's the good side, the positive side of social media is making those kind of connections. I didn't mean to, and I'm sorry. Thank you for being so kind about letting me interrupt you, Arturo. Did you have more you wanted to add to that?
Nothing more.
Okay. Gabby, has that sparked anything for you that you wanted to add?
I think that was the best answer that could be given because I was just floundering around. I'm like, how did I
No, it's
find
okay.
these games? I'm like, it's
Right.
probably word of mouth and itch.io, they have
Mhm.
like bundles that
Mhm.
you can buy. And so, I would do that.
And those
But I
bundles
think
are great. A lot of times they'll do them as fundraisers.
yes,
Um,
exactly.
so you're supporting, well,
Hmm.
Black Lives Matter or whatever, like
Yeah.
different really important causes. So you're finding out about cool games, but then you're also like
Hmm.
doing some good in the world.
I think we have a question.
We have a question, and I do want to say that Marie has put a little shout out in there in the comment there. So at Tinselfly. Thank you, Marie. I think we'll all go check that out, hopefully. And then Teague has a great question. So what is your favorite specific or type of game or mechanic that supported the storytelling of the game it was in? I think that's a wonderful question. Specific or type of game mechanic that supported the storytelling.
I'm gonna have to go with the like taking something away that you normally expect to have. Um, like the game where I was watching someone like the LiDAR game that I was mentioning earlier. You actually start out as it looks like this fully fleshed out game where you see yourself, you're in an astronaut suit, there's environment and everything, you can interact with objects, you can see everything, you can hear everything, and then you open a door and it's just dark and you can't see anything. And you have like you you see something off in the distance, I think, and you go towards it and pick it up, and it's that LiDAR sensor, and that's now your world with pixels that, come up about like around the objects that disappear over time. And that's now like something that gives you a new field of vision that you're not used to, which I think also improves immersion, which I think is important in video games where, you're not just over the shoulder of someone with like a gun or whatever, where it feels very impersonal. In this case, you're also struggling with the character. Anything that can, and I feel like that also works with other forms of media where when you're in the same shoes as the character, where like in an audio drama, if in the story the lights turn off, now you're suddenly in the same exact scenario where you're only hearing things or reading the transcript and they're only hearing things. Like there's no difference at that point anymore. Um, so I feel like clever ways of changing the world and how you experience it, um, and by taking something away, or changing an expectation, I think is one of my favorite uh, like tools. And I'll probably rant about something later really soon.
That'll be great. Arturo, do you have thoughts on this one?
For games in general, I have seen that the widespread adoption of rules about safety for players and consent from players has been really, really helpful because many people use role playing games as a tool of self discovery and self exploration. And that can be a very vulnerable state to be in. And you need to know that you are doing it with people that you can trust, that you can be more open with about parts of yourself that you are still figuring out. And the addition of these consent and safety rules facilitates that process and also helps you weed out which players and which game masters are not a good fit for you. Now, in particular, if we're talking about specific games, I'm reminded of a designer I met recently. He's called Michael Lowe. He uses role playing games to teach storytelling to school kids, and he has designed a system called Stories RPG. I'm going to put it on chat. Uh, and the way that the rules are designed are open and flexible for you to create basically any type of setting, any genre, any story, but also they are specifically geared toward giving power to the players to direct the story and to direct the creation of the world, because this is not the model where the game master is the adversary of the players. The game master is simply uh, someone who sets the tone and creates the space for the players to take the control of their own story and to collectively decide what the story is going to be. And even if they don't want to be so controlling about it, they may even discover the story instead of making it. That's also another way of seeing it, in which the players go on the travel of the story together, and instead of being the stand-in for the enemies, the game master is like the tour guide that facilitates the discovery of the story.
I love that the game master is the tour guide, not the dad, not the boss, not the adversary. I think that's wonderful. We are
Mhm.
at we are at the 10-minute mark. I want to give you guys a chance to get in some last words. So maybe just a quick, if there's one thing you'd like folks to take away, or one final word you'd like to have, Arturo, anything you'd like to add real quick?
Well, I am excited about the space that has been opened by the own goal by Wizards of the Coast this year,
Mm-hmm.
because I am seeing many independent creators produce their or start working on their own independent clones of the D20 system. And what we are going to see very soon is an explosion of creativity, because over the past decade, D&D 5e has been uh, everywhere. It has been what everyone plays, but everyone plays it because everyone plays it. And that is not good for creativity and for variety and for fun. And to be brutally honest, D&D 5e is just not a very well designed system. And now that Wizards of the Coast has lost so much goodwill and so much reputation, that's going to open a space where wonders can happen.
I love it. Gabby, any last words?
Um, hmm. Oh, okay. I to kind of like also go back to environmental storytelling, and also just express one of my favorite things about like video games is the music. Um, that I will blast like choir music in my car because it's from a game I've never played, but I just loved how it was composed and the lyrics are so well crafted, and I get the vibe of the game through just listening to, the music, and how, again, like, for Outer Wilds, if someone plays one of the main themes, I will cry on the spot. Like, the emotional ties that we can associate with emotions is so powerful for video games, and for community, because I'll play it like I went to PAX East, and then I was in the back seat of someone who was driving us home, an Uber, and they started playing this like composition playlist of all these different video games. And we're like, I know that one, I know that one, I know that one.
I
uh,
think that's a great note to end on. That could be a whole panel. Maybe next year,
yeah,
music and video
I'll
games, or
stop
music
making
and gaming.
excuses. But
But
yeah,
I did, for you tabletop folks, real quick, just to let you know, you can play music for your tabletop game,
true.
whether it's in person or on an online platform. So you can carry that emotion over. Where time is up. I hate it because I wish we could talk more. I feel like I feel like this went really fast. But thank you to Gabby and Arturo. Thank you to Marie and Teague and all the other folks in the audience. Please, if you have other questions or thoughts, hit us up over on the Discord. I think you have our various socials. And I was teasing you, Marie. I know Tinselfly is your game, so everybody check out Marie's game on Twitter.
Wrote it
Thanks,
down.
everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you all, and
Bye,
thank you
y'all.
again, Gabby and Arturo.